Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, September the 8th, 2021. Let's talk about Pete Buttigieg, formerly mayor of South Bend, Indiana, presidential candidate. Do you remember the Democratic primary, 2020? It's pretty amusing. Suddenly everyone's talking about Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of a rather small American city. And then comes the Iowa caucuses, and the media is reporting that he won. Well, there's a surprise. And then, we have more counting to do in our bizarre, arcane system. And guess what? We're just going to throw up our hands because we don't know who won the Iowa caucus on the Democrat side. Wow, that was very bad for Bernie, wasn't it? But Bernie just keeps getting screwed over, and I don't know. He doesn't like to make a fuss. He's not the sort of man that likes to make a fuss. You see, Pete Buttigieg, he violates my two-name rule with a surname that is as strange or even outlandish to Americans as Buttigieg. You want to go with Peter, not with Pete, to add some dignity there. We see that Pete Buttigieg was a Rhodes Scholar, and that is like the mark of Cain. It really is. You've been tipped for the top by the worst people. And he also worked for McKinsey, which is also kind of a mark of Cain. But Pete is now Secretary of Transportation. He failed upward. And as you probably know, yes, I should mention that Pete has a husband, and his name is Chasen. Was he named after the restaurant? And Chasen changed his surname to Buttigieg. So I guess we know who wears the pants in that family. But there was a recent blessed event for this couple. Here's a piece by Pamela Schumann Lang in American Greatness. That photo. By now, everyone has seen this photograph of the happy couple welcoming the children into their lives. There's so much to unpack in it, I don't honestly know where to begin. First, the gaze. Such a loving look shared between two people hopelessly in love with each other and happy beyond description warms the heart. Second, the two bundles of joy being held by the parents. Newborns, obviously, tiny, vulnerable, and blessedly, at the moment the photographer snapped the photo, asleep. Who will nurse them when they wake up hungry and crying? But I digress. Third, the hospital set. Of course, it's a set. They are likely not in an actual hospital, but just posing in a hospital bed. Note the detail that the designer of this nice piece of propaganda remembers to include. The crappy rolling table, complete with an old-fashioned corded telephone, and most exquisitely perfect, the matching hospital bracelets each proud father is sporting. Even their clothes are rather rumpled and wrinkled, as if they'd just gone through a grueling labor. Propaganda is meant to elicit emotion, not thought. And reading the comments on Twitter and Facebook, this was a roaringly successful piece of propaganda. Filled with women gushing over parenthood, Pete and Chasen are enveloped by the love of strangers, just as these two innocent infants are being enveloped by them. This won't be the end of the photo ops for these sweet children. They will be held up constantly as priceless little objects in the vainglorious Pete and Chasen show. Why, if they are lucky, they'll end up in the White House, and make no mistake, they will be used again as campaign props throughout their childhood. The coming photographs of them and their parents will be just as carefully choreographed as this one. An astute, but perhaps rude observer might ask, so where's the mother? A good question, but highly inappropriate. You see, once the mother or mothers finished her business, she was no longer a necessary part of this lovely picture. She did her job. Her usefulness is over. She has been disappeared. Beyond the happy comments and warm feelings this elicits, this is the true and frankly ugly nature of this picture. It's obvious that the mother is superfluous. She was just a breeder, a kind of cattle to these two wealthy, powerful, elite white men. She performed a function so that they could own two sweet pieces of property. Two vulnerable and now motherless infants will grow up in a home full of every luxury known to these men. I'm sure the nursery is set up with thousands of dollars of lovely furniture, toys, and luxury clothing. I'm quite sure they will live in a home filled with everything their little hearts will ever desire, except a mother. At about the same time this photograph was shared, there was another very important story coming out of the Supreme Court via Texas. SCOTUS narrowly refused to hear a case brought by an abortion clinic there, desperate to continue their dirty, lucrative business of murdering children not much younger than these two. Women across the country, we are led to believe, are in shock over this ghastly development. We are inundated with references to The Handmaid's Tale, where women are made to dress up like Cardinal Richelieu for some unknown reason, are forced to carry children for wealthy, powerful, elite white men, and then have their infants taken from them in order to start the process over again. How a Texas abortion statute aligns with that story is never explained. But wait a minute, you might ask. Isn't this happy picture of Pete and Chasen the epitome of that story? Have they not just done the unthinkable? Have they not contracted with some woman or women to breed for them? And having done her or their job or jobs been whisked away from the scene? Are those critically important women who gave birth to these two just gone? Have they not treated these children as commodities in order to stage this photograph to make them look like the perfect parents in the perfect setting with two perfect little children? Be assured, Pete and Chase and all the important people waxing rhapsodic over this photograph have done more to denigrate women than any Texas abortion law. If you read the comments under this photo in Twitter and Facebook, you will see how perfectly easy it is for people to be propagandized and manipulated. It's also wonderful. It's also normal. It's also ghastly. But please don't say that out loud, you homophobic theocrat. I'm assuming that these are two white babies in the photo, and so the cost would have been steep. Now, of course, it is illegal to sell children in the United States, but there's an easy way of getting around that, which is that the mother or mothers sign a contract so that they will receive expenses. Yes, not a payment, not flesh trade, but merely expenses. And everyone winks at this. No one wants to talk about what's actually going on here, which is that poor women are selling their children to rich men. It doesn't sound that wonderful when you put it that way, does it? Doesn't sound all that wonderful at all. And there's a lot of it going about amongst rich, powerful homosexuals. Andy Cohen, how many babies has he bought? And of course, there's Elton John and his Canadian catamite. And there are many such others. Of course, added to the expense of buying the babies, there's the expense of the nanny or nannies involved. We don't really believe that Pete or Chasen are going to be raising these children, do we? No. No. Oh, guess who else has a baby, a designer baby? That would be Anderson Cooper, the gay robot at CNN. Yes, it's true what the writer says, that we all cheer this, but the whole idea is absolutely revolting. They're merely objet d'art. And I don't know, I can speak with some personal experience, having been a house husband. Men are not very good with young children. Not very good at all. They lack the patience. They lack the empathy. After all, the baby didn't spend 9 months in my body. And of course, when babies evince distress, a hormone is secreted by women. Men do not secrete any such hormone. It's a typical male reaction to a baby which has been fed and then burped and changed, and it won't stop wailing. And why? What's wrong with you? I've done everything I'm supposed to do. And when the child gets older, 2 or 3 or 4 years old, when it becomes willful, unreasonable, unbearable, but the child is simply looking for attention, a lot of attention, total attention from its mother. And that is something that men simply cannot give. Let's go to the chat here. Hello to Head McNeck, Contiki Roulette, Dionysus, Anrun, Dan, Picasso 88. Chogokin 666 says mob surrounded black guy running against Newsom chick wearing a gorilla mask and tried to assault him. Bernie is a charlatan, Chogokin 666 adds. Buddy says, Kevin, let me get this off my chest. My mind boggles at how Kate Jackson could be the best angel in your view, while the nearly incomparable Jacqueline Smith exists. Metal Mike says, Bernie and Butt Judge. No Sleep Till Breezewood PA says Bernie can be ejected from the DNC and banned from politics, and he will still keep quiet and blame himself. I see Anren declares for Cheryl Ladd. Halper says they're all names out of a satirical novel. Okay, we're still talking about Charlie's Angels here. Metal Mike says, I like Larry Elder. I like Larry Elder too. I can't say that I've followed his career all that closely. He seems to be comfortable in his own skin. A lot of prominent black men in the United States do not seem to be comfortable in their own skin. Anaren says, have these kids been to Comet Pizza yet? Palpicasso 88 says, pause alert, saw a commercial for Miss Vicky's Chips. 2 gay dudes were watching a movie outside while camping. I'm just glad I didn't have to watch them pitch a tent. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. Okay. Poe's law is the law of the land, says a visionary companion. George Will was a Rhodes Scholar, says Che Blutarski. So yeah, Mark of Cain is right. Yes, I remember when George Will started, he was very much a Christian, a Lutheran, I believe. And this came up a lot. I used to read him right from the very beginning, in National Review. And I don't know, for the last 15 or 20 years, no, he's not a Christian. No, he doesn't believe in God, and finds the whole subject irritating. One might suspect that we had a fast one pulled on us. But my favorite story about National Review and George Will is that there was a great deal of mirth at National Review because George Will was always bashing rich men who had taken advantage of tax shelters. And then it was revealed, I guess, through a court action that George Will had taken advantage of tax shelter himself, which was being contested. And the story goes that William F. Buckley Jr. Said quite pointedly that there will be no mockery of George Will in National Review. A woman labored so 2 rich, homosexuals can play house. Oh yes, Pete Buttigieg served in what was it, the Naval Reserve? Got to buttress those credentials. No pun intended. Remember Clay Aitken on the cover of People magazine with his kid? He was lying down, looking exhausted, like he had just given birth to his visionary companion. Clay Aiken, is that guy still around? Does he still have a career? Well, you see how easy it is to make a star. You know, if they put me on television 3 or 5 times a week, yes, I would be a star too. You know, they'd have to come up with the proper origin story for me. No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA says Miss Vicky's chips use seed oils. Buy the special Boulder Canyon ones. Okay. William Hicks says, although Kate Jackson was pretty hot, also recently saw a bit of a film from the early 70s when she must have been 22 or 23 years old. Oh my, was she gorgeous. Jason Butt Judge. That is too funny. I've seen the portmanteau name. There's some NDP, MLA in Vancouver who's a homosexual who married some other homosexual, and they combined their 2 last names. And it's a very odd effect, I must say. Here's another family-related story. This is from Joel Kotkin at the American Mind. And I reviewed, earlier this year, I reviewed Joel Kotkin's new book, The Coming of Neo-Feudalism, which I cannot recommend highly enough. This is called The Fading Family. The world's major economies face a serious demographic crunch. For millennia, the family has stood as the central institution of society, often changing, but always essential. But across the world, from China to North America, and particularly in Europe, family ties are weakening, with the potential to undermine one of the last few precious bits of privacy and intimacy. Margaret Mead once said, no matter how many communes anyone invents, the family always creeps back. But today's trajectory is not promising. Even before COVID-19 pandemic, family formation and birth rates were declining throughout much of the world, not just in most of West and East Asia, but also in parts of South America and the Middle East. The ongoing pandemic appears to be driving birth rates globally down even further. A coincidence, surely. And the longer it lasts, the greater possibility that familial implosion will get far worse and perhaps intractable. Brookings predicts that COVID will result in 300 to 500,000 fewer U.S. births in 2021. Marriage rates have dropped significantly to 35-year lows. It's been half a century since Stanford biologist Paul Ehrlich's population bomb prophesied a surge of population that would foster Malthusian mass starvation, which echoed the premise of a lurid book called Famine 1975. Ehrlich and his acolytes urged extreme measures to stave off disaster, including adding sterilant into the water supply. Similar conclusions were drawn 4 years later in the corporate-sponsored Club of Rome report, which embraced an agenda of austerity and retrenchment to stave off population-driven mass starvation and social chaos. Well, they always work both ends against the middle, don't they? If there's going to be too few people, we're just going to have to turn society upside down. If there's going to be too many people, we're going to have to turn society upside down. The elite always knows what's best. Never mind that elite decisions are responsible for the birth dearth. Anyway, Kotkin continues. These predictions turn out to be vastly exaggerated with a rapid decline in global hunger. The anticipated population explosion is morphing into something more like an implosion, with much of the world now facing population stagnation and even contraction. As birth rates have dropped, the only thing holding up population figures in many places is longer lifespans, though recent data suggests that these may be getting shorter again. These trends can be felt in the United States, where the birth rate is sinking. U.S. population growth among the cohort aged between 16 and 64 has dropped from 20% in the 1980s to less than 5% in the last decade. This is particularly bad for the future of an economy dependent on new workers and consumers. This demographic transition is even more marked in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and much of Europe, where finding younger workers is becoming a major problem for employers and could result in higher costs or increased movement of jobs to more fecund countries. As the employment base shrinks, some countries, such as Germany, have raised taxes on the existing labor force to pay for the swelling ranks of retirees. Similar patterns can be seen in China. Expanding workforces like China's, which grew by 380 million between 1980 and 2012, drove a world-shattering economic boom. Now this resource is already in peril. Birth rates have cratered to historic lows. China's working-age population, those between 15 and 64 years old, peaked in 2011 and is projected to drop 23% by 2050. This plunge will be exacerbated by the effects of the now discarded one-child policy, which led to the aborting of an estimated 37 million Chinese girls since it came into effect in 1980. I just kind of break in here to say that, yes, this is not unfamiliar to me, but I always have to grit my teeth when I hear the conservatives, small c conservatives, or in my country, large C conservatives, talk on and on about how we need more people from China and India because they are just so much better than us, so much more entrepreneurial, and their family values, my. Well, in China and in India, children by the hundreds of millions are routinely killed in utero for the sin of being female. Are these really the kind of people that we want in our countries? And back to China here. By 2050, China is projected to have 60 million fewer people under age 15, a loss approximately the size of Italy's total population. The ratio of retirees to working people is expected to have more than tripled by then, which would be one of the most rapid demographic shifts in history, and by 2050 will be roughly 20% higher than that of the US. These grim statistics have created an imbalance between the sexes that could pose an existential threat to President Xi's China dream and perhaps to the stability of the communist state. But China is not the only Asia powerhouse with diminishing workforces, low fertility rates, and marriage rates. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore all face similar threats. Today's demographic stagnation represents a throwback to earlier times. After the relative buoyant growth in classical times, the Middle Ages were also a period of global demographic stagnation caused by famine, pestilence, pervasive celibacy, and poverty. Population growth soared with the rise of liberal capitalism in the early modern period, aided by changing attitudes toward motherhood, children, and families. Simon Schama describes the Netherlands, the font of this transition, as a republic of children built around the nuclear family. The medieval obsession with the Virgin Mother and the unrealistic cherubim, typical of Renaissance painting, were replaced with domestic images characterized by uncompromising earthiness. We now seem to be moving away from those values and is in the Middle Ages becoming less centered around the family. Serfs at least had religion and a sense of community. Our societies are becoming increasingly lonely, with single men hit hardest and children, often without two parents or any siblings, and chained to social media, increasingly isolated around the world. In the US since 1960, the percentage of people in the United States living alone has grown from about 12% to 28%. Even intimacy is on its way out, particularly among the young. The once swinging age groups now are suffering a sex recession. The percentage of American women who are mothers is at its lowest point in over 3 decades. Intact families are rarer and single living more common. In the United States, the rate of single parenthood has grown from 10% in 1960 to over 40% today. This is very bad news for society, particularly minorities, because intact families tend to have fewer problems relating to prison, school, or poverty. This social collapse is going global. In Britain, 8% of households in 1970 were headed by a single parent. Now the rate is over 25%. The percentage of children born outside marriage has doubled over the past 3 decades to 40%. In the Scandinavian countries, about 40% of the population lives alone. The breakdown in family structure has spread to Asia. Half of all Korean households have experienced some form of family crisis, mostly involving debt, job loss, or issues related to child or elder care. Shin Kyung-suk's highly praised bestseller, Please Look After Mom, which sold 2 million copies, focused on the filial guilt of children over failing to look after aging parents. The proportion of people living alone in China, once a virtually unimaginable situation, has risen to 15%. In Japan, the harbinger of modern Asian demographics, the number of people living alone is expected to reach 40% of the whole population by 2040. Japan has a rising misery index of divorces, single motherhood, and spousal and child abuse, all of which accelerates the country's disastrous demographic decline and deepens class division. More and more people are not only living alone, but dying alone. There are estimated to be 4,000 lonely deaths in Japan every week. This disinclination to form families is often described as generational choice, but American millennial attitudes about family are not significantly different from prior generations, though perhaps with a greater emphasis on gender equality. Among American childless women under age 44, barely 6% are voluntarily childless. The vast majority of millennials want to get married and have children. I'd have to quibble with that figure of 6% of American childless women under 44 being voluntarily childless. Now, does this mean that they've abstained from sexual intercourse from the age of 15, or that they're sterile? No, they have been using birth control or abortions to prevent pregnancy or to end pregnancy. And, I can't have a child until I find the right man. Oh, you do mean the one? There are plenty of men that you could get along with, that you could marry, but you have selfishly, and I use that word not in a pejorative sense, you have selfishly decided that you are not going to marry someone who does not come up to and perhaps exceed your high standards. High housing prices, crowded living conditions, and financial pressures certainly account for much of this gap. This phenomenon is particularly marked in the urban centers that dominate the world's economy and culture. Today, many large cities are becoming childless demographic graveyards. Between 2011 and 2019, the number of babies born annually in Manhattan dropped by nearly 15%, while the decrease across the city was 9%. The nation's premier urban center could see its infant population shrink by half in the next 30 years. The share of non-family households grew 3 times as fast in gentrifying neighborhoods as in the city overall. In the future, writes Steve Levine in Axios, shifting local priorities could write kids out of urban life for good. This phenomenon is even more pronounced in more crowded, expensive Asian cities. In Hong Kong, about 210,000 middle-class and working-class residents now live in tiny spaces, some described as hardly bigger than a coffin, and 2/3 of women want either one child only or no children at all, mainly due to the price of housing and a harried lifestyle. Major Chinese cities such as Beijing and Shanghai have fertility rates among the lowest in the world and only about 1/3 of the replacement level. Nearly a half century ago, Joel Kotkin writes, Daniel Bell saw a new class rising with values profoundly divergent from the traditional bourgeois norms of self-control, industriousness, and personal responsibility, which together form the essence of familialism. Instead, Bell envisioned a new type of individualism, unmoored from religion and family, which could dissolve the foundations of middle-class culture. Indeed, for some, particularly in Europe and North America, declining fecundity represents an ideal result, chosen by those who give up having children to save the planet in order to reduce the carbon impact of each additional human. The recipe for reducing family size fits with the widely promoted notion of degrowth, which has strong support from the oligarchs and financiers associated with the World Economic Forum. The goal is no GDP growth, less consumption, smaller houses, less class mobility, policies likely to reduce birth rates. Well, if you look at South Korea, whose TFR has declined to 0.98, if present trends continue, as they say, there won't be any South Koreans in 3 generations or so. Is this perhaps the true vision of feminism? Extinction? Kotkin continues, others, particularly feminists and gender activists, celebrate the decline of the family for more ideological reasons. The late feminist icon Betty Friedan once compared housewives to people marching voluntarily into a concentration camp. One recent New York Times article even linked women who choose to stay at home with white supremacy. Black Lives Matter, true to its quasi-Marxist ideology, has made clear its antipathy to the nuclear family, an attitude widely shared in the mainstream media as well. The more conventional Marxists in China, for their part, see these post-familial attitudes as a threat to the country's future. But it's Japan which again epitomizes the shift in Asian attitudes. There, traditional values such as hard work, sacrifice, and loyalty are largely rejected by the new generation, the Shinjinri, or new race. These younger Japanese, writes one sociologist, are pioneering a new sort of high quality, low energy, low growth existence. Maybe they don't need much energy, since nearly a third of Japanese adults entering their 30s have never had sex. This is not a good predictor for family formation. There is a choice we need to make, Kotkin concludes. A woke utopia where children and families are rare, upward mobility constrained, and society built around a collective welfare system would create a society that rewards hedonism and personal self-absorption. There is nothing as binding in a society as the ties created by children who give us a reason to fight against an encroaching dystopia. Well, the kind of future that we seem to be heading towards, and with Vancouver leading the way in North America, is one that resembles the rat and mouse experiments by Professor Calhoun, which I urge you to look up. When it turns out when these animals had nothing to look forward to except their own pleasure, disaster ensued, and rather quickly, as it turns out. Let's go back to the chat. Halper makes a Steely Dan joke. The shine of your Japan, the sparkle of your China. That's from their song, A Bodhisattva, which may be the most rockingest thing they ever did. There's a hilarious live version of that from Santa Monica, I think from 1974. And there's a lengthy introduction by a roadie. I think his name was Jerome Aniton. He used to drive trucks for the band, but he would drive drunk and cause difficulties. So he would introduce the band on stage, and he is drunk out of his mind, free associating like crazy, and it is very amusing indeed. You could probably find that on YouTube easily enough. Mouse Utopia experiments, yes. Yes, indeed, no sleep. If I had no resentment, I would cease to exist at all, says Chogokin 666. I've read, apparently the study's been done on this, that apparently, you don't wonder why you often see so many grumpy old men. Well, apparently it gives them something to live for, some reason to get up in the morning. Anran says all these trends are the result of deliberate policies from the elite. This and COVID aren't self-inflicted like World War I. The Kaiser didn't want to destroy Germany. These SOBs do want to destroy us. Red Sulfur says, let go of resentment. It only hurts you. Actually, I would have to agree with that. I don't think that there is any feeling on earth more destructive than resentment. Anger is something that tends to pass. You know, resentment is something that can be nurtured for a long, long time. Is degrowth kind of like the de-evolution, aka Devo? I don't know. I mean, apparently living in these tiny little spaces, you have people proselytizing it. Oh, well, you don't have to worry about possessions. And of course, you know, the World Economic Forum is telling us that in 10 years' time or so, 9 years, we'll own nothing and we'll like it. Well, even the meanest serf, you know, in the Middle Ages, had some treasured personal possessions. Dionysus says, my ex of 20 years didn't make kids. The fault was hers. I was quite willing to be a stay-at-home dad. Money wasn't the issue. Pink hair dye. Okay. Oh, invest in companies that makes box wine and cat litter, says Picasso 88. Interesting thing about cats, I hardly ever see them outdoors. I walk around the city. You see cats would come running up to you or sort of hesitate. No, I don't see them at all. The SPCA has pushed the idea successfully that cats should never be let outdoors. And apparently when you adopt a cat from a shelter, you are made to sign an agreement saying you will never let your cat outdoors. Well, this has had tremendous effects on cat psychology and behavior, which have already been noticed. That cats have become, indoor cats, have become fat, neurotic, diabetic, and destructive. The SPCA and other such agencies say, oh, no, cats shouldn't be allowed outdoors because it's dangerous. They might get run over by a car, which is true. Or they might lick up antifreeze and die, which is true. But the real reason that the SPCA doesn't want cats outdoors is because they are hunters. Because they love to hunt and kill birds and burrowing animals. Nature is red and tooth and claw, but the SPCA is determined to stop that. I mean, these indoor cats, aside from the fact that one of the advantages of owning a cat is that they look after their own waste, they don't anymore, and they just tear up your place because they're bored beyond measure. So what are we going to talk about next? What are we going to? Oh, yes. I suppose this is family related as well. Quillette. Was that the last bastion of liberalism? This is by Jerry Barnett. The war on porn, cancel culture on steroids. Yes. Oh, yeah, you talk about your cancel culture. What about our cancel culture? It's a problem with liberals for some decades, is that they have no interest in the idea of the good. It doesn't make any difference to them. And women selling their bodies, physically or virtually, that's their choice, isn't it? And choice is the highest virtue of all. I asked some OnlyFans creators what had attracted them to the platform. Miss Matthews, and I looked this person up. Don't do it. Okay, just don't do it. Pointed out that earning money on the platform isn't especially about exposing skin. Flesh is everywhere, gratis. Instead, my ability to tell a story with flair and wit was prized. I was living the Marxist dream, sole owner of the means of production, phone, wits, tits. Yes, that's a quote. Another veteran model, Ariel Anderson, suggested that OnlyFans had increased her autonomy and safety. For the first time, models like me were able to earn money directly from photographing ourselves. I continued to work for photographers, but my OnlyFans income insulated me against cancellations. We also found ourselves increasingly able to turn down work with people we were unsure about. This gave us a level of safety I'd never enjoyed previously in my 17-year career. The phenomenon of OnlyFans is really one of the saddest that I've observed in recent years. Of course, women taking off their clothes for money, well, that's been around for a long time. But men giving money to women, not so much, it's true, not so much because they're naked, because there are, billions of photographs of naked women available for free. But they think that they're making some sort of human connection with these virtual prostitutes. So very sad. This is an astoundingly long article. Oh, yes, and it takes the typical libertarian view. Sex trafficking, it doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist because I'm telling you it doesn't exist. It has to be a conspiracy theory. Similarly, the Reason magazine, all of this talk about marijuana being such more powerful today than it was decades ago, that's simply wrong. Well, no, it's not wrong. It's not wrong at all. Perhaps the the growth of pornography has something to do with our unwillingness not only to produce children, but to even engage in sexual intercourse itself. And perhaps this is related. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News: the elite are building remote doomsday mansions. Billionaires are buying high-tech bunkers in places far away from large population centers. What could they possibly be getting ready for? Wealthy folks are beginning to understand they don't want to be the last ones sticking around when the party ends in the U.S. It was, what's his name? Larry Ellison, is that his name? Apparently, he has the belief that he's got a super yacht, and he just never has to make landfall. He can just ride out the apocalypse by being on the ocean forever. And, it seems to me there's a pretty good horror movie in that, when his staff decide that they don't want to live under the reign of King Larry anymore. Pretty gruesome. Or I would certainly make it gruesome. Yeah, so apparently they think, the 1% of the 1% think that, when the shit goes down, they're just going to get on their helicopters and then, translate to their private planes and then get to New Zealand. And I can just imagine a mob, running up those stairs after them and catching them before they get on their helicopters. I think a pretty good movie to be made out of that as well. It would certainly be enjoyable. So in the last Canadian election, a fellow called Warren Kinsella was employed to dig up dirt about Maxime Bernier, a former Conservative MP. He should have been the Conservative leader, but this stupid system they had. Oh, yeah, it's a ranked vote ballot with 14 candidates. Utterly preposterous. But in any event, Bernier left the party. He formed his own vehicle, the People's Party of Canada. Oh, and he's a white nationalist, a bigot, horrible man, according to Warren Kinsella. And I shouldn't say very much about Warren Kinsella because he's exceedingly litigious and is the only person to have ever sued me unsuccessfully, I should add. So, yes, he was hired. Oh, no, not by the Conservative Party. It was by someone associated with the Conservative Party, which is totally different. This time around, the media is doing the same work. Oh, yes, it's there's people protesting Justin Trudeau, anti-lockdown, anti-masks, vaccine passports, white supremacists. White supremacists, wouldn't you know? Now, there's an organization which gets quoted a lot in the news. It's called the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. And you see a lot of familiar faces there: Bernie Farber, Richard Warman, and this fellow, Evan Balgord, who's quoted a lot, apparently was a top figure in the Canadian Union of Journalists, because that's what journalism is all about, suppressing speech that one disagrees with. But according to its own webpage, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network is an independent, nonprofit organization made up of Canada's leading experts and researchers on hate groups and hate crimes. Our advisory committee includes academics like Dr. Barbara Perry, court-recognized experts on hate crimes, lawyers with decades of experience with hate groups, people who stood up to the neo-Nazi Heritage Front in the 1990s. Are they kidding us? Are they kidding us? The Heritage Front, which was the most significant neo-Nazi movement in Canadian history, was established, paid for, and run by the federal government of Canada. Yeah, that's right. I'll read from Wikipedia. I mean, there's a great book to be written about this, but no one wants to write that book because it would reveal too many uncomfortable facts about our elite and our federal government. The Heritage Front was a Canadian neo-Nazi white supremacist organization founded in 1989 and disbanded around 2005. The Front maintained a telephone message line with a different editorial each day. The voice on the hotline was Gary Shipper. The line resulted in complaints to the Canadian Human Rights Commission and hearings into allegations that the group violated Canada's hate crime laws. It was founded in 1989 by former Nationalist Party of Canada members Wolfgang Drüge, who I have strong reason to believe was also a Fed, Gary Lincoln, Grant Bristow, a plant working for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Yes, who is Grant Bristow? We don't know who Grant Bristow is. We don't know. The Canadian Jewish Congress and B'nai B'rith had wildly different views on this infiltration and creation of a government-controlled neo-Nazi unit. B'nai B'rith was very much against it, and they claimed that Grant Bristow had a criminal record, possibly an American. We do know that Grant Bristow, prior to co-founding and directing and being the paymaster for the government of the Heritage Front, was employed by the Canadian government to infiltrate the South African embassy in Canada and to disrupt it. Yeah, that was your conservative government of Brian Mulroney. Nobody seemed to twig that when they were invited to Libya by Gaddafi, when they came home, there were all sorts of immigration problems and the like. And Grant Bristow made a phone call and all the problems went away just like that. The Heritage Front infiltrated the Reform Party. In fact, there were several government attempts to infiltrate the nascent Reform Party and to disgrace it by making the equation Reform Party equals Nazis. That's never been properly investigated either. That Grant Bristow went around, saying all this talk about the Jews, talk. It's time to replace talk with action and declare war on the Jews. Warren Kinsella wrote a book about hate in Canada, the first edition of which is very strange, because there was an expose in the Toronto Sun of the Heritage Front, which revealed, it talked about Grant Bristow and said who he was. Now, this information is not in the first edition of Kinsella's book, Web of Hate. And when asked about this, he said, that's because I didn't know about Grant Bristow at the time. Well, I believe it was Al Dunphy wrote the expose. It was on 2 parts. First part on Sunday, second part on Monday. And if we believe Warren Kinsella, he read the first part of this bombshell expose, but then decided, nah, I don't have to read part 2. I'm sure it could have happened. It turns out that Warren Kinsella was being impersonated by someone from the Heritage Front. I believe it was Bristow, who was attempting to collect names of Jewish students at the University of Toronto. And Warren Kinsella didn't make a fuss about this for some reason. Didn't make a fuss about it. Is one of my dreams that if I had the plenary power, I would be able to compel Warren Kinsella and Bernie Farber to testify, under penalty of perjury, what they knew about Grant Bristow and the Heritage Front and when they knew it. But this brings us to a story in the London Free Press today. Police probe stone throwing at Justin Trudeau. Witnesses point to PPC official by Randy Richmond and Calvi Leon. A national anti-hate network and witnesses have already connected the stone thrower to Shane Mitchell, the head of the Elgin Middlesex London Riding Association for the People's Party of Canada. The anti-hate network also connects Marshall to social media sites that promote neo-Nazi and white nationalist material. How very convenient. How very convenient indeed. It's my view that white nationalism in Canada, much as in the United States, is feds all the way down. The Canadian government was involved in paying for neo-Nazism in Canada back to the 1960s. Back to the 1960s. Yes. So we have this man, this bad man, and he's connected with the PPC, which again disqualifies Maxime Bernier as a white nationalist, possible neo-Nazi. Which brings us back again to the Canadian anti-hate organization. They have a website, antihate.ca. Known white nationalists spotted at violent anti-Trudeau demonstration. Again, how very convenient. How very convenient indeed. And terrible, terrible ideas. You know, this chimera of the Great Replacement, which is absolutely not happening, except, you know, when we're cheering it for happening, because white people are bad. I spent a frustrating 45 to 60 minutes this morning trying to find out who supports this organization, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. There are no financial declarations on their website, which is suspicious, wouldn't you say? And then I went to the Canadian government website, main one, various offshoots. They are funding this organization. They make it clear how much. They're not saying. I thought all of this information was supposed to be in the public domain. But at the bottom of antihate.ca/about, and this is a condition of accepting money, there's that little Canada figure that with the little flag on it, funded by the government of Canada. Our work is made possible in part thanks to a grant from the Anti-Racism Action Program, which is part of the government of Canada. So the government of Canada, that is Justin Trudeau's government, the Liberal Party, in effect, is funding a AstroTurf organization which seeks to destroy a rival political party. Golly, we're just back to the days of Brian Mulroney and the PC Party of Canada and the Heritage Front. In some good news, I talked about this yesterday. This is from the Canadian Press. A federal court judge ordered the Leaders Debate Commission to permit writers from the Rebel News Network to fully cover this week's 2 official televised Leaders Debate. Let's go to the chat. Chococan666 says, except pretty much everything the conspiracy theories have said has occurred. It's like British Searchlight. It's run by intelligence, says Chococan666. No sleep till Breezewood PA says, I think Ramsey Paul is just weird. He jumped off the obvious sinking ship with, and I don't recognize that name, Thumpenther, but didn't do the same with the other crowd and attack certain people to keep his cred to them. So who is a Fed? Anglin, Ramsey, or Jones? I tend to think that those that make the most outlandish statements, I mean, obviously outlandish, are Feds. That's my belief. I mean, there seems to be pretty strong evidence against, say, David Duke. And who was that other fellow, Don? What's his name? I can't remember his name. I don't spend a lot of time. I don't waste a lot of time on neo-Nazis or would-be neo-Nazis. But this Don fellow, who was a major white nationalist or neo-Nazi figure in the United States for decades, was revealed to be a Fed. Andrew Anglin writes for the UN's Review, says Dionysus. Yes, I know he does. I don't look at his stuff. Middle Mike says, Doug and Rob Ford defaced hundreds of reform lawn signs by changing the R into a D. I did not know that. Did Canadian forces serve in the Boer War? Says Chococan666. Yes, indeed they did. Just a few thousand of them, but they were there. Well, how to avoid feds? The best way to avoid feds is that when people start talking about violence, walk away. Walk away. Because it's a provocation. Almost certainly, it's 99% a provocation. I mean, what is to be achieved by this violence? No Sleep says, well, this is actually just like a certain spurgy rocket scientist in America who got his whole group turned over to feds after he died. No, you've seen so many of these stories. The New York Times features this on a regular basis, and antihate.ca does too. Oh, yes, I was a soldier in the neo-Nazi movement, and I did and said terrible things about Jews and blacks and immigrants, but then I saw the light, and now I work to educate people about the evil done by them. Oh, you mean you came in from the cold? Is that what you were saying? Well, who is paying for this educational work that you do? Warren Kinsella, punk rocker extraordinaire, says Palcasso 88. Yes, if you listen to Warren Kinsella, last time I checked, he pretty much claims to have invented punk rock in Canada. So, what are we going to talk about? Here we go. Oh, yes. This fellow called John Malloy. Wikipedia describes him as a former politician in Ontario. He was a Liberal member of the Legislative Assembly from 2003 to 2014, who represented Kitchener Centre and served as a cabinet minister in the governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. Yes, certainly well educated, BA Carleton, MA, LSE, doctorate, Oxford. He worked at the Centre for International Government's Innovation in Waterloo, Ontario. Nice work if you can get it. He was a backroom boy, legislative assistant to Jean Chrétien for 5 years, and also assistant to Stéphane Dion, John Manley, and Yvonne O'Neill. He now teaches at Wilfrid Laurier University. And he has a piece in the National Post, which is an excerpt from his book, which is published by Novalis, which is a Catholic publisher that one should run, not walk away from. John Malloy, Catholicism has become a punchline in Canadian politics. It need not be this way. How has the rich faith of denominations like Catholicism been boiled down to abortion and a handful of other issues mainly related to sexuality? Because everyone agrees that sexuality is just of very little importance. Leave aside the fact that if people stopped having sexual intercourse, the human race would die out, that demography is indeed destiny. Oh, no. It's funny that the homosexuals themselves, the gay rights or queer rights activists, they don't think that sex is unimportant. They think that it is the only important thing in the world. Oh yes, do you believe that being gay is a sin? That question posed by a reported conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, just after the 2019 federal election marked a low point in Canadian political discourse. Well, I could point out that no one is getting too intimate with, Muslim politicians in Canada, in terms of what they believe in. But, I don't like to play the double standard game. Essentially, the argument that this fellow is making is, if the Catholic Church simply decided, if all Catholics were like Justin Trudeau, where it's absolutely meaningless to them, then everything would be wonderful. Because actually, culture of openness and social justice is what Catholicism is about. A rich history of social justice advocacy. Jesus Christ was really sort of a Palestinian Che Guevara. You see, so long as we understand that, that's the same line as Michael Corn as well, then Catholicism is going to be just fine. Of course, that is simply not true. Simply not true. Anyone who's ever espoused a traditional Catholic view on issues of morality will be hounded for the rest of his life. Oh, filled with zealots obsessed with abortion and sex. And again, sex, that trivial thing, that trivial thing. And I think we're going to move on now, yes, to Joseph Tainter and the collapse of complex civilization societies, is Cambridge University Press book from 1988. So how did states coalesce in the first place? And as Tainter points out several times, they tend to be offshoots because there are only six original states in the known history of the world. So the summary and implications: complex societies are problem-solving organizations in which more parts, different kinds of parts, more social differentiation, more inequality, and more kinds of centralization and control emerge as circumstances require. Growth of complexity has involved a change from small, internally homogeneous, minimally differentiated groups characterized by equal access to resources, shifting ephemeral leadership, and unstable political formations to large, heterogeneous, internally differentiated, class-structured, controlled societies in which the resources that sustain life are not equally available to all. This latter kind of society, with which we today are most familiar, is an anomaly of history, and where present requires constant legitimization and reinforcement. The process of collapse, as discussed in the previous chapter, is a matter of rapid, substantial decline in an established level of complexity. A society that has collapsed is suddenly smaller, less differentiated, and heterogeneous, and characterized by fewer specialized parts. It displays less social differentiation and is able to exercise less control over the behavior of its members. It is able at the same time to command smaller surpluses, to offer fewer benefits and inducements to membership, and it is less capable of providing subsistence and defensive security for a regional population. It may decompose to some of the constituent building blocks, e.g. states, ethnic groups, villages, out of which it was created. The loss of complexity, like its emergence, is a continuous variable. Collapse may involve a drop between the major levels of complexity envisioned by many anthropologists, e.g. state to chiefdom, or it may equally well involve a drop within a level, larger to smaller, or transitional to typical or inchoate states. Collapse offers an interesting perspective for the typological approach. It is a process of major rapid change from one structurally stable level to another. This is the type of change that evolutionary typologies imply, but in the reverse direction. And the study of collapse, chapter 3, begins with a quotation from Ronald Ross. I see no reason to suppose that the Roman and the Megatherium were not struck down by similar causes. Introduction. It is not for lack of effort that collapse is still a little understood process. The research devoted in the historical and social sciences to explaining collapse is substantial and has produced a literature which clearly reflects the significance of the topic. Among literate societies, the attempt to understand the disintegration of states can be traced nearly as far as the phenomenon itself. The fall of the Western Roman Empire must surely be the most wrenching event of European history. It figured prominently in the writings of the late empire itself, of the Middle Ages, and up to recent times. The collapses of the Zhou dynasty in China, the Mauryan Empire in India, hold similar significance for those areas. Quite often the fall of such early empires acquires for later peoples the status of a paradise lost, a golden age of good government, wise rule, harmony and peace when all was right with the world. This is clearly evident in the writings of, for example, Gibbon on the Antonine period of the Roman Empire, of the Hundred Schools on Zhou China, or of Nehru on Mauryan India. The attempt to understand the loss of paradise is at the same time a grasping to comprehend current conditions and a philosophy of how a political society should be. Here then is another dimension to the study of collapse. It is not only a scholarly attempt to understand the past and a practical attempt to ascertain the future, but also in many minds a statement of current political philosophy. This last aspect will not figure highly in the present work, but does account for much of the perennial concern with collapse. What collapses? More on definitions. Ancient and medieval writers saw collapse in a way that is largely congruent with the perspective of the present work. That is, as the fall of specific political entities. With the formal development of the social sciences in the last 2 centuries, however, a new conception has emerged: the transformation of civilizations as cultural forms. Many of the most prominent 20th century scholars, such as Spengler, Toynbee, Kroeber, Colborne, and Gray, and most of those who are read by popular audiences, have written in this vein. This school sees the end of a civilization as a transformation of the features or behaviors that characterize a cultural entity. These features are typically those that form the popular notion of civilization: specific styles of art and public architecture, traditions of literature and music, and philosophies of life and politics. Examples include Toynbee's Syriac or Spengler's Magian, Arabian, and Faustian, Western civilizations. To such authors, it is the end of these civilizations, that is, their transformation into some other civilization, defined as new traditions in art, literature, music, and philosophy, that is of concern. Each civilization may typically contain a number of individual political entities that themselves rise and fall, but the longevity of the civilization itself usually transcends such short-term fluctuations. In some cases, though, a civilization can be weakened when such polities conflict. So to Toynbee, the end of his Orthodox Christian civilization lies in the decimation of the manpower of the Byzantine Empire in the Romano-Bulgarian War of AD 977 to 2019. The overexploitation of the emperor's Anatolian recruiting grounds for this campaign led to the disastrous loss to the Seljuk Turks at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, and to the subsequently easy conversion of Anatolia to Islam and the Turkic language. Yet in the main, the rise and fall of civilizations does not correspond to such authors nearly so closely to specific polities or events. We will get back to Tainter and his collapse of complex societies tomorrow. But let's look at this. Let's look at Toynbee, for example. These features are typically those that form the popular notion of a civilization's specific styles of art and public architecture, traditions of literature and music, and philosophies of life and politics. Let's take just a random year. Let's say 1900. Music is the, we'll start with art. Art of 1900. Does it bear very little, if all, resemblance to the art of 2021? No, it does not. Although, modernism in art was already apparent by 1900, but art was still at that time representational. It is certainly at the high art. It is no longer representational and has not been representational for decades. How about public architecture? Well, in Toronto, where the City Hall is, the so-called new City Hall was, this was acclaimed, as something that was going to make Toronto a world-class city. This has been removed from Wikipedia years ago, but it used to show the pictures of the buildings that were raised so that the new Toronto City Hall could build. These were beautiful, substantial, imposing buildings. Nothing like that exists anymore. We went through a phase where everything was public building was utilitarian, brutalist, austere, hideous, ugly. But now we've moved to a Baroque or Rococo form where, it's been fashionable now for some time to erect buildings which appear to the onlooker as if they are about to fall onto their heads. So no, those things are changed. literature. Does literature exist any longer? It's an interesting question. The short story is dead. Poetry is dead. Novels are dying. What kind of novels exist? Well, there are the academic novels, which no one reads. And then there is chick lit, agasagas and the like, or the terrible story of growing up Chinese in Australia. Yes, I was reading about some such author at the Quillette who determines that she is never going to read another novel by a straight white male. Hear my pain. Well, okay, how about your observations of the world? No, I have one observation of the world, that the world, the universe, indeed, exists solely to persecute me and to frustrate my every desire, and white people are responsible. Yes, that is where we are with literature. Music. Now, we're seeing the beginnings of modernism. How would you say that? The collapse of diatonic music by 1900. But after 1945, this was all swept away. And in any event, a so-called serious or classical music now is of concern to a relative handful of people. One only has to watch Warner Brothers or MGM cartoons from the 30s, 40s, and 50s to know that classical music, parts of it, at any rate, were known to pretty well everyone. You wouldn't put Liszt pieces in a cartoon if you didn't believe that people were going to recognize them now. And with the rise of rap music or hip hop or whatever you want to call it, the very idea of music has been called into question because a man or men grunting over computer-generated beats is not music as we have traditionally understood it. Philosophies of life and politics, they are no longer the same at all. Philosophy of life in 1900, live a decent, virtuous life, get married, have children, strive so that they can have a better life than you did. No, that's all gone now. Its philosophy of life is selfishness above all now, hedonism, and even nihilism. Again, I think I mentioned Rick and Morty last week. That's a pretty good place to start if you want to know where to look. Guess we live in a stochastic universe. In fact, why one universe? Many infinite universes, so any decision that is made in any one of them is insignificant, totally insignificant. So if one wants to talk about a collapse of civilization in the way that Arnold Toynbee understood it, there's few people who could argue in good faith that our civilization has indeed collapsed. And let's go back to the chat. Okay, just ask Luke Ford, says Brandon Smith. Ask him about what? Popcasso 88 quotes John Dryden, here lies my wife, here let her lie, now she's at peace, and so am I. Hear my pain, smell my entitlement, says Chogokin 666. Who was the architect? The guy from The Fountainhead, Metal Mike? All I know is that Gary Cooper played him in the movie. Very forceful he was. He pretty much ravished Patricia Neal, did he not? They built some hideous University of Toronto buildings. Thank God some of the classic ones are still erect, says Metal Mike. Yes, there's a few decent neo-Gothic buildings at the University of BC, but that campus is now completely overbuilt. It's just they're determined to remove any space, any fresh air, any sunlight from it entirely. And of course, the University of BC is built at the very edge of the rainforest, as far west in Vancouver as you can go, right on the edge. There's the Pacific Ocean, And no, we don't want to work with that. Let's just keep throwing up these concrete towers. There's an impressive Boer War monument in the center of Toronto, says Jules Roy. What happened to Ramsey Paul's first wife? Asked Paul Casso 88. I know he has a couple of kids. Wasn't he famous for having a girlfriend much younger than him? Oh, I see someone has already mentioned that. Okay. I want a KMG Joe doll for Christmas, says Don Willis. When will this book end, says Gamayan. It will end when it ends. I'm not going to answer that. Nobody ever calls me, so it's almost certain to be a spam call. Don Willis says, I knew a guy who went to federal prison. They had support groups, tennis courts, meatless meals if wanted, craft days, therapy rooms, a garden. He said it was one of the best times of his life. I can look up Rococo and comprehend it later. Please explain your use of the term stochastic here. I mean stochastic in terms of flying apart. That's the way that I mean it. Let's go to Wikipedia. Stochastic, from the Greek stokos, meaning aim or guess, refers to the property of being well described as a random probability distribution. I think that pretty much brings it home. Does it not? Random probability distribution. And let's talk about China. It's a piece on Revolver News. While America gets woke, China cracks down on toxic celebrities, girly men, and video games. America's discredited experts class has long claimed that economic growth and Western-style democratization go hand in hand. China's ascent to industrial superpower decisively refutes that self-serving narrative. Over the last few weeks, China has shown that it isn't just charting an alternative course on economics and governance. China is also attempting an entirely new approach to modernization itself. Even if this approach fails, the choices China makes say important things about the decay of American liberal democracy. The People's Republic is launching what? Hang on, I just have to make this bigger. The People's Republic is launching what, at least superficially, looks like one of the most ambitious social engineering efforts ever taken in a developed country. The decrees have come in a vast wave over the past couple of weeks. In the last days of August, China announced that from now on, school children are banned from playing video games except for 3 hours on the weekend. Teenagers are the future of our motherland, Xinhua quoted an unnamed NPPA spokesperson as saying, protecting the physical and mental health of minors is related to the people's vital interests and relates to the cultivation of the younger generation in the era of national rejuvenation. Gaming companies will be banned from providing services to minors in any form outside the stipulated hours, and 1 hour a day, 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., and only Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And they must ensure that they have put real name verification systems in place, said the regulator, which oversees the country's video games market. Then on Thursday came a decree which earned even more attention, a ban on television programs featuring Ning Pao, literally girly guns celebrities. This is from the South China Morning Post. China's top media regulator has announced a boycott of what it calls sissy idols, among other new guidelines during an ongoing cleanup of the entertainment industry. The authorities have been increasingly critical of the trend some refer to as sissy men, which include pop idols that wear makeup or who do not conform to the macho male stereotypes prevalent in traditional Chinese culture. Some in China also see the popularity of such idols, often referred to as little fresh meat, as a threat to traditional social values. A Revolver comments, the ban on sissy boys got the most attention, but China's new rules are substantially more ambitious than a declaration of war on girly men. Notably, China's new regulations also prohibit featuring the children of celebrities in reality TV programs. And again, from the South China Morning Post, other specific boycotts the guidelines listed include people who have broken laws or whose behavior and speech have gone against public order and morals, as well as idol audition shows and the encouragement of malicious fandom culture, including inducements for extravagant spending and boycotting overly high pay for acting jobs, fake contracts, and tax evasion. The children of stars will also not be allowed to participate in television shows, according to the document. Revolver comments, this last ban, though perhaps the least noticed component of the new decrees, may be the most interesting and far-sighted. This isn't some mundane crackdown on dissidents, of which there are many in totalitarian China. If China's only concern were to suppress dissent against the government, it might be content to distract and dumb down its populace with limp-wristed pretty boys and spoiled rich kids. After all, that approach works like a charm here in America. But instead, China wants to separate its youth from the nation's TV screens. In essence, China is trying to stamp out the idea of a celebrity who is famous for being famous. The word celebrity, derived from Latin via Middle French, originally referred to a solemn rite or ceremony. The corresponding idea of a celebrity itself was more serious in its early usage, as it meant that the celebrity be celebrated for his deeds. But today in America, the concept of celebrity has decayed along with society itself. A celebrity need not have deeds worthy of celebration. 300 years ago, celebrities were made or made themselves. Today, they just are. In America and many other Asian countries, coverage of famous for being famous celebrities has long stood out as one of the most garish and decadent aspects of modern popular culture. Think about Keeping Up with the Kardashians or the child tranny biopic I Am Jazz, or before that, Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie on The Simple Life. In America's liberal democracy, those elevated to celebrity status have become totems, sacred objects, and leading indicators of what sickens American society. Consider the famous Kardashian clan. Kim Kardashian, the daughter of a famous participant in the O.J. Simpson murder trial, became famous in her own right after the release of one of the first viral sex tapes featuring her and rapper Ray J. In a revelation that should shock nobody in America, a 2016 book claimed that the sex tape was not leaked but deliberately released by the Kardashians in order to help Kim climb the ladder or pole of fame. And this is from the New York Post. Kim Kardashian and her momager, Kris Jenner, deliberately leaked her now infamous sex tape to make her famous, a new book allegedly confirms. Kim signed a contract with Vivid Entertainment in 2007 to leak the sex tape she made with Ray J in 2003. A new book, Kardashian Dynasty by Ian Halperin, claims. He quotes a source in the adult film industry who said a mutual friend of Kim in Paris had advised her that if she wanted to achieve fame, a sex tape would be the way to go. Kim had discussed the idea of producing a tape with her family beforehand. I don't know why this is surprising to people. One, Kim Kardashian and her mother made millions of dollars from this tape, so thus she would have had to sign off on it. Second, you cannot sell commercially, at any rate, recordings of other people, engaging in intimate acts without their permission. It cannot be done. Now, of course, you can trade such videos. You can send them on the computer to people, et cetera, but selling them, even going so far as to putting an ad in a magazine saying, you want to see that famous sex tape, well, you set up a business there. And if this business is based on you profiting from the unauthorized antics of a Kardashian and a Ray J, the police are going to come after you. And there'll probably be a civil suit as well. But back to Revolver. Of course, one of the most famous members of the extended Kardashian clan is Bruce Jenner, who in 2015 became the first wave on D-Day shock trooper of transgenderism. Today's reality television stars, of course, can jump straight to the propaganda phase. No build-up necessary. For 7 seasons, TLC has bombarded Americans with the adventures of tranny teen turned Harvard admit Jazz Jennings, an unfortunate-looking person. And thus a vicious cycle has emerged. America's reality TV stars are not only symbols of the decay and degeneracy plaguing America's soul, they are also direct participants in this decay, driving it forward relentlessly, trampling everything sane and healthy before them. Chinese authorities seem to have spotted the trend, and they've decided to excise the cancer before it grows too powerful. In the words of Twitter user Manju Baturu, at a glance, it seems China has taken a look at what has happened in Western societies over the past 30 years and is backing away quickly. China has another test case country it can look at, however. South Korea is geographically closer by and more culturally and ethnically similar. Like China, it has also rapidly grown from poverty to become an advanced industrial and technological power. While America has plenty of sissy boys of all stripes in its popular culture, that type of male is even more prominent in South Korea thanks to the enormous popularity of K-pop music. Bands like BTS have popularized a manufactured, commercialized, and deeply effeminate male aesthetic, which is overtly exploited by those trying to tear down conventional sex differences and gender roles. Consider this article from the Daily Vox, a South African publication, redefining masculinity the BTS way. And there's a picture of BTS, and they not only look effeminate, they look borderline retarded. In this flood of effeminate men in popular culture, is it truly as damaging as China fears? It's absolutely clearer than South Korea, where this style emanates from things are not well. In 1960, South Korea's fertility rate was above 6, similar to China's. Over the next 20 years, it fell rapidly as the government embraced aggressively anti-natalist policies to drive down the birth rate. In 1983, the fertility rate dropped below the 2.1 replacement level for the first time. It has never recovered. In 1998, it fell below 1.5. And in 2018, it fell below 1. Absent immigration, South Korea's population will more than halve every generation. Since the new millennium, the government has ramped up spending efforts to encourage couples to have more children. It hasn't worked. As South Korea's cradles lie empty and the population plunges into an abyss, the basic relation between the sexes in South Korea has become deeply toxic. In an Ipsos poll of 28 nations, a staggering 87% of South Koreans said there was a large amount of tension between progressive and traditional values in their country, the highest of any nation surveyed, even above the United States. The clash between progressive and traditional values is heavily split along sex lines. In the same survey, South Koreans were by far the most likely to say relations between men and women in their country were strained. Yeah. So I guess that's one of the advantages of dictatorship. As Revolver concludes, this by itself is enough to conclude that Chinese leaders in crucial respects care more about their nation and their people than American leaders do about this country and its people. When China's leaders see poison coursing through society, they act to stop it. In America, our leaders promote, subsidize, or even mandate it. This poisonous woke agenda has become a defining feature of an American identity. Is hardly an exaggeration to say that the woke agenda is as crucial to America's dominant institutions as the CCP agenda is to the dominant institutions in China. None of this is to say that China's system is desirable or something the West could or should emulate. But one of the greatest contemporary political challenges is finding a way to reconcile advanced technological progress with a content-stable, flourishing society. Well, is it even possible? Is it? I mean, we've been considering the collapse of complex society, and it would seem that highly complex societies become decadent. They also become less and less fecund, which is something that we saw in both ancient Greece and in Rome. That contraception was already spoken of as a scandal in ancient Greece. That is to say, how widespread it was. Here in the West, we have contraception, we have feminism, we have more. Well, as of 2 years ago or a year ago, more women in the workplace than men. We have pornography. We have the effeminacy of men. You remember that hilarious viral video of the world's most effeminate man dressed in some sort of half a suit and a skirt, pretending to work for not Jennifer Psaki. Remember that? And this comes from, the White House. Even as Joe Biden is still trying to persuade us all, decrepit as he is, what a tough guy he is. Beatty is based, said Ogun's Irons. Indeed, he is. Very much so. Oh, some interesting. Yes. Bloomberg. Copy a URL, and apparently that is suspicious activity. I don't know how copying a URL could be suspicious activity, but here we go. BlackRock sets up $1 billion made in China fund as Soros laments. And as Henry Kissinger famously said about Iran versus Iraq, couldn't they both lose? This is there an author listed? No. BlackRock Inc. raised 6.7 billion yuan, or $1 billion, for its first China mutual fund, starting onshore investments for clients in the world's most promising wealth market, right after billionaire financier George Soros called its China investment a tragic mistake. The U.S. giant's local unit closed fundraising days ahead of the September 10th deadline without hitting a planned $8 billion yuan ceiling in order to start investing sooner. The fund attracted more than 111,000 investors. We are very proud of achieving this milestone for our China fund management business and are grateful for investors' overwhelming support, said Rachel Lord, BlackRock's chief and head of Asia Pacific. While BlackRock faces a challenge appealing to yield-hungry Chinese retail investors in a crowded industry that's dominated by local firms, it's tapping the market in one of its strongest years. New mutual funds have raised more than 2 trillion yuan this year through August, already the second highest annual amount ever. BlackRock is leading a global foray into China's asset management industry after becoming the first wholly foreign-owned mutual fund manager. Foreign investors are seeking growth potential despite worries from critics like Soros, who wrote in a Wall Street Journal op-ed this week that the push by the world's largest money manager into China could risk clients' money and U.S. security interests. Yes, it could also risk Soros's plan to make himself even richer by shorting China. Strangely, the Bloomberg story does not mention that. Here's an interesting story, which appeared February 22nd of this year from Reuters. Just Reuters staff. Fact check. You know it's going to be good when you get a fact check. Are you ever surprised when you look up a fact check? No. You know what the narrative is. The mRNA coronavirus vaccine is a vaccine, and it is designed to prevent illness. A video shared on social media has claimed that the mRNA coronavirus vaccine is not actually a vaccine, but a device designed to make people sick. This is false. The video, which has been viewed more than 11,000 times on YouTube, is inserted in the story. In it, a man referred to as Dr. David Martin, yes, they put his name in scare quotes, who has been linked to previous misinformation about the pandemic, is seen speaking on a video call. In the clip, Martin claims that the vaccine is not actually a vaccine, but a medical device that makes people sick. Quote, "This is not a vaccine. This is an mRNA packaged in a fat envelope that is delivered to a cell. It is a medical device designed to stimulate the human cell into becoming a pathogen creator," unquote. You're getting injected with a chemical substance to induce illness, not to induce an immunotransmissive response. In other words, nothing about this is going to stop you from transmitting anything. This is about getting you sick and having your own cells be the thing that get you sick, unquote. Okay, here's the fact check. While there are many different types of vaccine, they broadly have the same definition. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control defines a vaccine as a product that stimulates the immune system into producing immunity to a disease and protects the person from that disease. This is how mRNA coronaviruses work, but in a different way that had been seen before. It's kind of like the bait and switch with marriage, right? We're going to legalize gay marriage. No, you're not. Why not? Because marriage, by definition, is a man and a woman, or a woman and a man. I mean, barring polygamy. Well, we'll just change the definition. Oh, okay. So we're just going to change the definition of what a vaccine is. Well, Reuters informs us while earlier vaccinations used a weakened or inactivated form of virus, mRNA vaccines instruct cells to make a specific protein to trigger an immune response. These vaccines have been found to prevent symptomatic and severe effects of COVID-19. Research is ongoing to determine whether the vaccines have an effect on transmission. However, data analysis in a pre-published study by the Israeli Health Ministry, Israel, and Pfizer Inc., which is not yet peer-reviewed, found the Pfizer mRNA vaccine reduces infections, including in asymptomatic cases, by 89.4%. Yeah, what's that fallen to now? And in symptomatic cases by 93.7%. Verdict, false. mRNA COVID-19 vaccines are designed to induce an immune response and to protect a person against the disease. This article was produced by the Reuters fact-check team. Read more about our work to fact-check social media posts here. So it's a vaccine, but it works unlike any other vaccine that's ever existed. Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing at all. And David Martin is a real person, and he has a PhD. He is the founder and CEO of a company called MCAM. And he served as CEO and chairman since 1998. MCAM has been an international intangible asset underwriter and analyst firm spanning work in innovation, finance, trade, and intangible asset finance. Dr. Martin is the developer of several innovation-based quantitative indices of public equities and is the founder of Purple Bridge Funds. He received his undergraduate BA from Goshen College, his Master's of Science from Ball State University, and his doctorate PhD from the University of Virginia. I found this rather by accident. This is a story from statnews.com by Damian Gard. Lavishly funded Moderna hits safety problems in bold bid to revolutionize medicine. And apparently Moderna, like Theranos, which is mentioned in this article, doesn't like publishing peer-reviewed studies about its supposed innovations. Yeah, nothing suspicious there. Banzel has repeatedly promised that Moderna's new therapies, they're talking about them as therapies, will change the world, but the company has refused to publish any data on its mRNA vehicles, calls them vehicles, sparking skepticism from some scientists and a chiding from the editors of Nature. And this it sort of jumped out. Talking about it as software, that certainly jumped out. Apparently, there's been difficulties with mRNA. And could you guess what that is? mRNA is a tricky technology. Several major pharmaceutical companies have tried and abandoned the idea, struggling to get mRNA into cells without triggering nasty side effects. Ooh, that doesn't sound good. Not good at all. Dr. David Martin, is interviewed, or there's a transcription of an interview he did with Mike Adams, which appears in conservativewoman.co.uk. And he has some very interesting things to say about Australia. Let's see if I have time to get to that. But he has very interesting things to say about, well, this V product, okay? And that's what I'm going to call it here. He says, you'll notice I'm saying okay, we're talking about Fauci here. The weaponization of the coronavirus, which officially started in 1999 when Anthony Fauci came up with this brilliant idea that he could come up with an infectious replication defective, and those are the actual words used, form of coronavirus. And he paid researchers at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He paid researchers there to invent a pathogen that did not exist. That's the reason why I'm very careful with the language that I use. You'll notice I'm not saying a virus, and I'm not saying a vaccine for good reason. We are not talking about a virus. We are talking about an engineered pathogen. We are not talking about a vaccine. We are talking about the introduction of a computer simulated code in the form of mRNA. But it's a computer simulated code not to stimulate your immune system, but to turn your body into a factory producing S1 spike proteins similar to those found in coronavirus. Slow that tape down and listen to it again. Exactly what I said. You're not injecting a piece of a virus. You're not injecting a viral fragment. You are injecting a code to make your body produce a pathogen. And then you're hoping, and that's all you're doing, you're hoping that the pathogen your body produces also elicits an immune response. And we have more on this, because this gets ever more interesting and, well, frightening. Actually, that's the only way I can describe it. Alex Berenson, on his Substack Unreported Truths, has an entry today called A Lawsuit in 3 Acts. Hey, Twitter, can you hear me now? Act 1, August the 26th, 2021, and before. The CDC defines a vaccine as, quote, a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, unquote. Definition of terms. Immunity, protection from an infectious disease. If you are immune to a disease, you can be exposed to it without becoming infected. Vaccine, a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, protecting the person from that disease. Vaccines are usually administered through needle injections, but can also be administered by mouth or sprayed into the nose. Vaccination, the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a specific disease. Berenson continues. Act 2, August the 28th, 21. I tweet that we should not think of the mRNA vaccines as vaccines because they do not stop infection. Twitter rules my tweet misleading and suspends me for violations of our COVID-19 misinformation rules. This defamatory act prevents me from using my account anywhere in the world. Act 3, September the 1st, 2021. The CDC changes its definition of vaccine, removing the standard that vaccines produce immunity. Now they just need to stimulate the body's immune response. Discovery's going to be awesome, Alex Berenson concludes. Yeah, we'll just change the definition. And no one, who would know? Why would anyone care? I mean, you people, you non-experts, you thought you knew what a vaccine was, just in the same way you thought you knew what marriage was. Well, we're going to tell you that that is no longer true. And we are the experts and your moral superiors. So you better get with the program or else. I came across this by accident today by Philip Magnus in the American Institute for Economic Research. Fauci was duplicitous on the AIDS epidemic too. In May 1983, amid the rapidly escalating AIDS crisis, a doctor at the National Institutes of Health promoted a stunning theory about the newly encountered disease in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Noting that the same issue of the journal contained an article documenting one of the first cases of the immunodeficiency disease's appearance in an infant, the author sounded an alarm about, quote, the possibility that routine close contact as within a family household can spread the disease, unquote. The article took an increasingly speculative turn in promoting this new theory. Quote, if indeed the latter is true, then AIDS takes on an entirely new dimension. If we add to this possibility that non-sexual, non-bloodborne transmission is possible, the scope of the syndrome may be enormous, unquote. Although the article reiterated the need to be cautious in accepting these findings as they awaited more evidence, the discovery should at least alert us to the possibility that we are truly dealing with AIDS in children as transmitted through routine interaction. The author of the article has since attained widespread familiarity. It was Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, a rising star within the NIH bureaucracy. Press contacts, noticing Fauci's article, immediately sounded the alarm. Household contacts can transmit AIDS, read one nationally syndicated report in the UPI Wire dated May 5th, 1983. The AP queried the next day, does AIDS spread by routine contact? And quoted Fauci as their lead authority. The New York Times raised the specter of household transmission between family members, invoking Fauci's commentary as its main authority. We now know, of course, that Fauci's theory was wrong. HIV, the virus that was later discovered to cause AIDS, only transmit by exposure to infected bodily fluids, such as blood, or by sexual contact. The infant infection discussed in the same JAMA issue involved vertical transmission from the mother to child during pregnancy. The damage was already done, though, as the media went to work stoking alarm about AIDS transmission through simple routine contacts. Hundreds of newspapers disseminated the distressing theory from Fauci's article. Writing a few weeks later, Pat Buchanan enlisted Fauci as the centerpiece of a rebuttal against Health and Human Services Secretary Margaret Heckler, who told him, quote, there is no evidence that the general population is threatened by AIDS, unquote. Yes, given Fauci's cheerleading for AZT, probably the most deadly treatment ever approved by the FDA, which is directly responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people, one would have thought that this would torpedo Fauci's career, but nope. There are certain people who, I'm sorry to be crude, as they say, are born with a horseshoe up their ass. And let's go to Vox Day, pandemic of the vaccinated. And here are the confirmed cases of COVID from Israel, July the 4th to July the 31st. And it's pretty shocking. From age 20 to 90 plus, how many cases? Cases fully vaccinated, 15,634. Cases unvaccinated, 3,038. So unless, given how Israel was so much ahead of the curve in terms of vaccination, unless we stipulate that the biology of Israelis is substantially, radically different from those of us in, say, Canada, the United States, what's happened there is going to happen here, and is already starting to happen. A Twitter account ran Israeli regulatory affairs specialist, computational biologist, posting COVID-19 reliable data. Now we have the deaths data by vaccination status on our COVID dashboard. There were 607 deaths in August 2021. Deaths by vaccination status. Unvaccinated, 218. 1 dose, 14. 1 plus 2 dose, 313. 1 plus 2 plus 3 doses, 62. So 2 to 1. By 2 to 1, it is the people who are vaccinated, partially or fully plus 1, who are dying in Israel. So much for Dr. Fauci's miracle seed. And in some brief news, this is from Steve Watson at Summit News. After Dr. Fauci demonized college football fans attending games and having fun, CNN weighed in with a panel of talking heads who expressed their anger about people gathering and breathing too vigorously. CNN panelist Dr. William Schaffner declared, quote, people are cheering and enthusiastic, exhaling with vigor. Username available, exhaling with vigor. If there are people infected, they can infect people around them. Nobody was wearing a mask. I'd be very surprised if we didn't have outbreaks. Fauci, meanwhile, is under fire after a new report published by The Intercept revealed that his NIH issued a bat coronavirus grant to a group called the EcoHealth Alliance for $3.1 million, including $599,000 that the Wuhan Institute of Virology used in part to identify and alter bat coronaviruses likely to infect humans. Senator Josh Hawley responded, Anthony Fauci has repeatedly and deliberately misled Congress and the American people. Resign and face a congressional inquiry. What does Jimmy Kimmel have to say? This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Jimmy Kimmel returned to the airwaves last night to amplify the debunked claim that poison control centers are reporting huge spikes in calls from people taking the eye drug, despite the AP having to publish a retraction admitting that this is not true. People are still taking this eye drug. You know, the poison control centers have seen this spike in calls from people taking this livestock medicine to fight the coronavirus, but they won't take the vaccine, which is crazy, Kimmel said. The comedian went on to chide people taking the drug for distrusting pharmaceutical companies, noting that it is sold by Merck. It's like if you're a vegan and you're like, no, I don't want a hamburger, give me that can of Alpo instead, Kimmel joked. I leave you people alone for 2 months and you start taking horse worm medicine, Kimmel said, adding, what a weird summer. The joke might have made sense if it wasn't based on a manifestly provable piece of fake news. Yeah, but it served its purpose, didn't it? Because these Trumpistas, these anti-vaxxers, these COVID denialists, you know how stupid they are? They eat horse paste. Yeah, they eat horse paste dewormer. Yeah, they're really that stupid. There are various ways to take the eye drug. It can be taken in paste form. It can be taken in pill form. It can be taken in a liquid injectable form. It doesn't have to be in a paste. And let's take a look at dailyskeptic.org. No, minister, vaccine passports are not necessary to end the pandemic. And I guess I'm reminded again that the United Kingdom has a vaccines minister called Nadhim Zahawi. News roundup. Will the unseemly rush to give our children a vaccine? Why the unseemly rush to give our children a vaccine they don't need? If even the experts can't agree, heaven help a 12-year-old trying to make an informed decision, writes Alison Pearson in The Telegraph. Bill Gates finally realizes that lockdown hurts children, writes Toby Green in Unheard. MPs approve biggest personal tax rise in 2 decades. Government hopes to begin booster vaccine rollout in next fortnight. You see, we got the vaccine. Oh, okay, you're going to need 2 jabs. You're going to need 3 jabs, and then maybe 4 or 5, and then the 2 pills with the protease inhibitors that you're going to have to take every day, made by Pfizer. Yeah, I'm sure you're all looking forward to that. Nadhim Zahawi won't rule out vaccine passports in pubs. You don't want people drinking in pubs. You want them drinking alone with ultra cheap booze from Tesco. Because people drinking together is, what purpose does it serve? 3rd man dies in connection to contaminated Moderna vaccine doses in Japan. Recent coverage of lab leak theory was driven by right-wing media. And, okay. And I think I'll talk about this piece in the New York Times tomorrow, elites versus populism. But Oh, yes. I'll leave you on a disturbing note here. This is from Don Braid from the Calgary Herald, a man I've known of for 30 years. I'll tell you a story about this fellow. He and his wife wrote a book about Preston Manning. And so he was eager to talk about it on the radio show, on the radio station of which I was executive producer. So I booked him and his wife to be interviewed about the book for a solid hour on the drive time, or the most popular morning talk show. So a couple months after that, Don Getty, the premier of Alberta, resigned. And so I called him up, Don Braid, and I said, can we have you on for 5 minutes this afternoon to talk about Getty's resignation? He said, how much are you going to pay me? I said, pay you? Do you remember when I gave you and your wife an hour's free publicity for your book about Preston Manning? And he said something like, I don't see what that has to do with it. I concluded from that Don Braid is not a good man. But so he's talking about Jason Kenney's plan to give $100 bribes to the unvaccinated. Okay, here's when we get to the best bit here. Okay. There's very little embracing of the unvaccinated in the medical community. Nothing angers doctors and nurses more than devout anti-vaxxers who suddenly show up in hospital to fight for their lives. It feels like some people want to punch a hole in the life rafts while expecting healthcare workers to keep bailing, said Dr. Peter Brindley of the Department of Critical Care Medicine and other senior roles at the University of Alberta. We have done our compassionate best not to shame, but it hasn't worked, he wrote in a blog post. We respect your ability to make choices, but choices come with consequences. I've witnessed too many people reject science right up until they reach the hospital doors and then suddenly demand science stat. Dr. Brindley worries about a growing loss of empathy among exhausted health workers who see firsthand evidence that the fourth wave is caused by the unvaccinated. But no, it isn't. Never mind that. Okay. I would suggest to Dr. Brindley that what you have to say, and particularly the tone in how you say it, suggests that your empathy, if you like, has reached a dangerously low level, and perhaps you should consider stepping away or perhaps finding another profession. Again, do we want to, are we going to apply the way you look at the world? How about people who mash themselves up, rock climbing? Kind of irresponsible activity. How about all the diseases, conditions that come from obesity, particularly morbid obesity? We've seen arguments for decades that smokers should be punished, but of course they die 5 years earlier than non-smokers and thus save the health system a great deal of money. How about homosexuals? Because they're still getting, HIV and other diseases from unprotected sexual activity. Perhaps is your empathy, you're running out for them? No, you wouldn't dare say that. You wouldn't dare say that. Okay, Jokin666 says may go to Glasgow for stabbing season. Enjoy some Buckfast. Who else do we have here in the chat? I'm sure many doctors are, red pep? I don't know. There are a great many doctors and a great many nurses who are skeptics, if you will, but the media doesn't like to talk about that. Nobel Prize winners, top epidemiologists at places, like Oxford University. Ever heard of it? It probably is best I drink alone, says Dionysus. I suppose that's one of the problems of, of living alone. If you have a wife and you go someplace and you have one too many, then, she can be responsible, for dragging you away and, putting you into a cab or, driving you back and make sure that you get back, to bed safely. Metal Mike says, wait, you're leaving on a disturbing note? The entire show featuring disturbing stuff? No, just we're fed up. Doctors, we're increasingly fed up with these people who come to the hospital even though they're sick. Again, you're not protecting the health service. You've inverted the order of priorities there. Health service exists to protect us. That's what it's all about. I mean, just this pissy attitude of entitlement. It's as if he was one of those nuns, working in Catholic hospitals years ago. No, Dr. Brindley is being paid, and well paid indeed, for his labors. But they always act, these doctors and nurses, they always act as if, well, not always, I'm exaggerating, but they frequently act as if, this is charity that they're engaged in. Turn up the George Thorogood, says Caligula 138, and the Delaware Destroyers. Oh, it's called compassion fatigue, says Dionysus. Is compassion but what, being a nurse and a doctor? Is that what it's about? Probably more in a nurse than doctor. One of my brothers has spent a great deal of time, months in hospital over the last 2 years, and he is not pleased with the bedside manner of nurses. Not pleased at all. Well, just to make it short, again, their attitude seems to be that they are there to serve the nurses. The nurses are not there to serve the patients. Emmett Kelly's says, however much the CCP tries, I believe they will lose the mandate of heaven in the end. All Chinese regimes have. And on that bombshell, as Alan Partridge would say, I'm going to wrap it up for today. I don't know. I'm thinking, should we make Friday, or at least this Friday, the COVID-free KMG show? I know a great many of you find it disturbing or depressing, but seeing it is the biggest story in the world, and has been the biggest story in the world without interruption since, February of last year? But coming up on the show tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I have a comedy for you. It is by the legendary Jacques Tati, and it is called Playtime. And on Friday, the book club, The True History of the Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz, who was one of Cortez's soldiers, who was there from the beginning, even before the beginning. And on Music Monday, September the 13th, I'm going to be talking about how the Child Ballads, which is a collection of English folk songs, have been employed in songs set to music. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like to show any portion of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could, no kidding around, is kind of a critical importance to me at this particular time. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada and would like to make a donation to the live stream, this may be done directly through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.